नेटवर्क ने इसे एक नया डायमेंशन।
Hello and welcome. I'm Uday Pratap Singh. You're joining us on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top stories this hour. US and China have reached a framework agreement on TikTok aiming to shift the app to US-controlled ownership over national security concerns. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent described the talks as productive and confirmed President Trump will speak with Chinese President Xi on Friday to discuss wider trade and future negotiations. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio visiting Israel on Monday promises unwavering support amidst the Gaza war. He calls for the elimination of Hamas, saying Gaza needs a better future. Prime Minister Netanyahu praises Rubio's visit as a strong message of US backing. US President Donald Trump is warning Israel to be very careful in its actions against Qatar. He praises Doha as a great ally and describes Qatar's ruler as a wonderful person. Trump also urged the Gulf state to improve its public relations efforts. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, Russian air defense systems have intercepted 6 Ukrainian drones over Belgorod region. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has said that Ukrainian forces have advanced in border districts of northern Sumy region. Polish President Karol Nawrocki approves NATO troop deployment under Operation Eastern Sentry, as Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky warns Russia is testing NATO's eastern flank and offers to teach allies cost-effective counter-drone strategies to strengthen regional defense. Trilateral exercise Freedom Edge begins off Jeju as US, South Korea, Japan boost defense capabilities. North Korea condemns the drills as reckless show of strength, warns actions could bring negative consequences to participating nations. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has called for Israel and Russia to be barred from international sports competitions until the barbarity ends. He questioned why Russia was expelled after invading Ukraine, but Israel remains active despite the war in Gaza. His comments come a day after pro-Palestinian protests forced the cancellation of the final stage of the La Vuelta cycling race. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer's office has condemned Elon Musk for using dangerous and inflammatory language during a far-right rally. Musk had urged the dissolution of Parliament and the ouster of Starmer's government, warning crowds to fight back or die. In Jerusalem, United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio has pledged America's unwavering support for Israel in its war against Hamas. In a press conference with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, Rubio said that peace can only come once Hamas is eliminated. But Rubio also acknowledged growing concern over Gaza's humanitarian crisis, saying the U.S. is not indifferent to civilian suffering. He defended a controversial aid distribution plan meant to bypass Hamas, while noting that Washington is open to alternatives. Let's in fact listen in to what he had to say.
People of Gaza deserve a better future, but that better future cannot begin until Hamas is eliminated. That better future and that kind of peace is not even possible until the hostages are released, all of them, every single one. And so that's what we continue to be focused on. That's what the president wants to see happen. And that's what you can count on our unwavering support and commitment to see come to fruition. As far as the president's been clear on the ongoing issues in Gaza, and that is that every single hostage, both living and deceased, needs to be home immediately. Hamas can no longer continue to exist as an armed element that threatens the peace and security, not just of Israel, but of the world. And that the people of Gaza deserve a better future, one that cannot begin until Hamas is eliminated and until all of the hostages, both living and deceased, are home. These things that people are doing and these different countries are doing at the United Nations, first of all, they're largely being done because of their own domestic politics. Second of all, they're largely symbolic. They have really no impact whatsoever in bringing us any closer to a Palestinian state. The only impact they actually have is it makes Hamas feel more emboldened. It makes other elements like Hamas feel more emboldened. It actually has made it harder. It's actually served as an impediment to peace.
Netanyahu, in turn, praised the alliance with Washington as stronger than ever, calling President Trump Israel's greatest friend in the White House. He also mentioned that Rubio's presence in Israel is a clear message that America stands with Israel. Remarks come as Israel presses on with its Gaza campaign, while international pressure mounts over the humanitarian toll. Let's in fact now listen into what Netanyahu had to say.
American-Israeli alliance has never been as strong as it is now. And the president has been an outstanding global leader. He's really transforming the world to better all of us. And I can again repeat what I've said time and time again. He's the greatest friend that Israel has ever had in the White House. Your presence here in Israel today is a clear message that America stands with Israel. You stand with us in the face of terror, in the face of the incredible, I would almost say, Middle Ages lies that are directed against us, the rising anti-Semitism in the world, and the really the weak governments that are putting pressures on us because they collapse under the pressure of Islamist minorities and incredible vilification.
Ross Feingold, political analyst, is joining us live from Taipei. Ross, thank you for being with us on NewsX World. What do you make of these statements issued by Rubio and Netanyahu after their talks in Jerusalem? What should be read into what was discussed and the outcome?
It's fairly consistent with the positions of the two governments in recent months. I thought what Secretary Rubio said is consistent with the statements of President Trump since President Trump took office in January of this year. And Netanyahu's praise of the Trump administration policies is very consistent with things that Prime Minister Netanyahu has previously said, including when he visited the White House. We know that there have been occasions of tension between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, most recently over the Israeli attack on Qatar. But generally, those few moments of tension have not influenced the overall relationship, which remains extremely positive. And the United States government under President Trump is a big supporter of Israel. And frankly, that just doesn't look like it's going to change in the near term.
Yes, however, of course, this physical visit is a big boost, for the optics for ties between the two countries after statements were issued by the United States president, which, had expressed his concern over that strike in Qatar. And he'd also, of course, praised Qatari state and the head of state, of course, as well. So this physical visit, do you believe, is good for the optics and will reassure those who were thinking that perhaps the U.S. disapproved of the strike and that could cause relations to sour?
I think the Israelis probably knew that despite the criticism from President Trump or others in the administration, that, again, the overall relationship was probably not going to be affected. And frankly, up to now, the response from the Qataris has been relatively restrained. They know that Israel wasn't declaring war on Qatar. Israel was targeting specific targets, specific individuals from Hamas who were meeting in Qatar. I mean, of course, it is a violation of Qatari sovereignty, and the Arab countries will continue to support Qatar in making that view known. But ultimately, the direction here is not going to change. The Trump administration, for example, will continue to provide weapons if Israel needs weapons to continue the war in Gaza. When it comes to Israeli settlements or potential expansion of settlements in the West Bank, the United States is not going to criticize Israel. So Prime Minister Netanyahu knows that he has a good friend in the White House and a very supportive administration. And the visit helps that. But even if Rubio wasn't visiting at this time, it probably would not be any signal that the Trump administration is changing its support for Israel. I think that support is fairly solid and will remain unchanged.
All right. Well, stay with us. We're turning to more news now coming in Jerusalem. United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio also said Washington will continue to press Qatar to play what he called a constructive role in ending the war in Gaza and securing the release of hostages. Standing alongside Prime Minister Netanyahu, Rubio said the fundamentals remain unchanged as Hamas still holds 48 lives captive. On Sunday, though, Hamas announced that it has suspended prisoner swap talks, accusing Israel of targeting its delegation during airstrikes in Doha last week. The group said 5 of its members and a Qatari security officer were killed, while its senior negotiators survived. The move threatens to derail months of mediation efforts by Qatar, Egypt and the U.S. Meanwhile, Israeli strikes continue to hit Gaza City, leveling residential towers. Israel says it is targeting Hamas infrastructure, but Palestinian officials report dozens of civilian deaths.
And so we're going to continue to encourage Qatar to play a constructive role in that regard. We're focused because at the end of the day, no matter what has happened, these fundamentals still remain. There is still a Hamas, there is still 48 hostages, and there is still a war going on. And all of these things standing in the way of a better future for the people of Gaza and a peaceful end to what's happening now. So we're going to remain focused on what we can do next.
Ross Feingold, a political analyst, is live with us on this story. Ross, clearly Marco Rubio saying that despite this strike, they will continue to encourage Qatar, in fact, to put a bit of pressure on them as well to continue these mediation efforts.
The Qataris deserve a lot of praise throughout the war in Gaza since October 2023. They've been heavily involved in negotiating the past ceasefires and continuing to be involved along with the Egyptians and at times the Americans as well, to bring about another ceasefire. So they've worked very hard on this, and it's understandable that the United States would continue to encourage the Qataris to play that role. But obviously, there's now going to be a gap because previously the Qatari government dealt with the Israeli government as part of those negotiations. Israeli officials would visit Qatar to talk directly with the Qataris about the progress of those ceasefire negotiations. And now there's a trust gap between Qatar and Israel. And how can that be bridged going forward? At the moment, we simply don't know.
All right. And Ross, also very quickly about now the mediation efforts. Do you believe they have been derailed, or can things come back on track?
It's really unknown at the moment, and Prime Minister Netanyahu has decided to proceed with the attack on Gaza City, and that is frankly consistent with his policy, which all along has been the destruction of Hamas. So is there a potential for a ceasefire? I would hesitate to say it's impossible, it will never happen. But even if it happens, it's not happening in the next few days, and in the interim, the war is going to continue and the civilians are going to continue to suffer.
All right. Appreciate you joining us, Ross Feingold, with your perspective on that story. United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio, speaking in Jerusalem with Israeli PM Netanyahu, reiterated maximum economic pressure on Iran until it changes course. This is what the U.S. Secretary of State had to say.
That's why the President continues with our campaign of maximum pressure. There will continue to be maximum economic pressure on Iran until they change course. That's why we are encouraged to see our partners in Europe begin the process of snapping back sanctions on Iran. They are clearly out of compliance with what was already a flawed deal to begin with, and we encourage them to continue down that road. We 100% support that. That is exactly what needs to happen.
On the other hand, the International Atomic Energy Agency is urging the swift implementation of its cooperation framework with Iran to restore global confidence. IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi stressed that limitations on inspections threaten international peace and security.
The logic of the work of checking nuclear material throughout the world lies on the fundamental premise that when the IAEA can do that, doubts, uncertainty, fears are not there. And when that ability is compromised or is limited, or we cannot do what we are supposed to do, then international peace and security are indeed at risk. And we have seen this throughout history in particular, but not only in the Middle East, and dramatically last June in Iran, when its nuclear facilities were attacked. And together with His Excellency Dr. Arakchi, we signed an agreement indicating, summarizing the technical measures, the practical steps that we need to do to resume this indispensable work in Iran. Now it's up to us together, Iran and us, to implement it and to restore the confidence and to move forward.
Tensions between the US and Iran have escalated due to Tehran's nuclear program, which Washington fears could lead to weaponization. At the same time, the IAEA has struggled to monitor Iran's nuclear facilities due to restrictions. Past incidents, including US-led strikes on Iranian nuclear sites, have intensified fears of a regional and global security crisis. Ambassador Mahesh Sachdev, former Indian ambassador, is joining us live on the broadcast from New Delhi. Ambassador Sachdev, what do you make of the US Secretary of State's comments on Iran and the pressure that they want to continue to exert on the country?
Thank you for having me. I think the events are moving towards a swift denouement. Following the Israel, Iran and US fighting a couple of months ago, we have had a new situation where Iran decided not to collaborate with IAEA and forbade the inspection regime and talks, etc. That led to E3 countries, the 3 European members of JCPOA, namely France, Germany, and UK, to threaten a snapback to the pre-JCPOA sanctions, pre-2015 sanctions before signing the nuclear deal. This would mean that Iran would be under even more universal sanctions. Right now, the sanctions are those from the United States and European Union alone. So Iran, there were 3 conditions put by the E3, and important among them was resumption of talks with IAEA and resumption of talks with the United States. Iranians seem to be reluctant to do so, but they know that if snapback comes into effect, then they would be under very severe pressure internationally. So they are trying to figure out what to do, whether there can be a midway recourse and temporary suspension of the snapback for a few months. Now here, we also need to keep in mind that the JCPOA signed in 2015 was valid for 10 years and its validity ends next month. So that's why I say that the situation is moving towards a climax, and Israel...
Yes. However, what about IAEA? Do you see cooperation with Iran by the agency increasing in the coming days?
IAEA would like to do that. It has a number of pending issues, some dating back to, let's say, 2 decades when enriched uranium particles were found at some places Iran has not been able to explain. But then another aspect would be to inspect the damage done to the nuclear site by Israeli and American air raids. Third would be to locate and ensure that its safety of the enriched uranium up to 60% that Iran had declared before it was attacked. So all these 3 and more conditionalities are what IAEA would like to have Iranian compliance with. And E3 countries are acting as bad cop while IAEA acts as a good cop. Meanwhile, United States State Secretary has already given the statement which you read out in the beginning. So the pressure is mounting on Iran, and there seem to be the very little recourse that it had.
Okay.
It can walk out of it, face the sanctions, but I think that would not be the preferred option.
All right, Ambassador Sachdev, appreciate you joining us with your perspective on that story. Now, United States Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, in fact, has said in Madrid today that US and China have reached a framework agreement on the future of TikTok. The agreement aims to shift the app to US-controlled ownership, addressing national security concerns. Both sides describe the talks as productive, highlighting cooperation on trade, investments, and other economic issues. Bessent confirmed President Trump will speak with Chinese President Xi on Friday to discuss wider trade matters, including tariffs and future rounds of negotiations. China also signed agreements to promote mutual investments, expand Poland's EV industry, and encourage bilateral trade. U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer said both sides maintained respect and agreed on challenging issues, signaling a positive step in U.S.-China economic relations. Andrew K.P. Leung, China strategist, is joining us live from Hong Kong. Andrew, thank you for being with us today on NewsX World. What do you make of the progress in these talks in Madrid, particularly on the issue of TikTok?
Well, of course, the initial indications are quite positive, as President Trump already posted on social media that he was quite happy with the outcome. Bearing in mind that TikTok has been extremely popular in the United States amongst the young people, and in fact play a role in helping him winning back the White House, thanks to help from Elon Musk and others in the social media milieu. But the fact remains that the TikTok has now gained further popularity, not only in the United States but around the world. And indeed, most of the TikTok subscribers are very worried in the United States that somehow it's going to be shut down if there is no deal agreed with Beijing. So this comes as must be a welcome move to Trump's supporters and his potential supporters. But I think that the details are still yet to be revealed because I don't think Beijing would sell off the entire TikTok algorithms, which of course drive the TikTok business, not only in the United States but around the rest of the world. I think the United States justification for hiving off the TikTok segment in the United States is for security. Data security and national security. I think that probably the agreement would satisfy those concerns by ring fencing the data with a very tight rein as far as the United States security is concerned, and without TikTok's parent company, BitDance, giving up all the algorithms. The science behind it, and definitely not affecting the parent company's control of TikTok platforms in the rest of the world. Now, let's not forget that for a time when the TikTok future was still uncertain,
yes,
there was a backlash in the United States, resulting in a lot of TikTok members migrating to the China-owned a TikTok-like platform, which is in China called Douyin, but it's just like TikTok. It's a different name in China, but the China version doesn't use English language, but nevertheless embeds algorithms which enable English speakers or English writers to communicate with their counterparts in either language. But as far as because there was a fear that TikTok may shut down in the United States, I think that the Chinese version have seen quite a large number of American youngsters flocking to the Chinese version, the Red Note.
But we're going to have to wait and watch how this pans out. With now, it seems some sort of agreement reached between both the sides. Stay with us. China has criticized the U.S. Meanwhile, saying Washington's call for allies to impose higher tariffs on China to pressure Russia over the Ukraine conflict is an act of unilateral economic bullying that threatens the global trade system. Foreign Ministry spokesman Lin Jian said China's trade and energy cooperation with other countries, including Russia, is legitimate. Lin reiterated China's position on Ukraine, stressing that dialogue and negotiations remain the only viable solution, and promised to protect China's sovereignty, security and development interests if its rights are undermined. Listen in to what Lin Jian had to say.
中国同包括俄罗斯在内的世界各国开展正常的经贸能源合作，正当合法，无可厚非。美方的做法是典型的单边霸凌和经济胁迫，严重破坏国际经贸规则，威胁全球产业链、供应链安全稳定。事实证明，胁迫施压不得人心，更解决不了问题。中方在乌克兰危机上的立场是一贯的、明确的。对话谈判是解决乌克兰危机的唯一可行出路。从危机爆发第一天起，中方就秉持客观公正立场，坚持劝和促谈。中方坚决反对有关方面动辄拿中方说事，坚决反对对中方滥施非法单边制裁和长臂管辖。如果中方的正当权益受到损害，中方必将坚决反制，坚定维护自身的主权、安全和发展利益。
Andrew Leung, China strategist, is live with us on this story. Andrew, what do you make of China's warning to the US, even as the US seeks to pressure European countries to levy high tariffs on China as well for their purchasing of Russian oil?
Well, of course, the United States is levying huge tariffs, not only on China, but across the world, including American allies, including India, the European Union, and other countries in the Global South. It's a demonstration of President Trump's unilateral mindset, capitalizing Americans' superpower status and trying to bend the whole world to Americans' will. And that's why the Chinese foreign ministry spokesman refers to this breaking and destruction of the world rule-based order, which has served the rest of the world so well after the Second World War. But increasingly, the United States is moving towards unilateralism, using coercion and bullying, to sacrificing other countries' rightful interests to Americans' selfish aims. And so that's what lies behind the China's position and the United States and President Trump's position. But but through negotiations, at least hopefully, some sort of agreement could be reached in ongoing discussions.
All right. Appreciate you joining us, Andrew, with your perspective on that story. United Kingdom Prime Minister Keir Starmer's office has condemned US tech billionaire Elon Musk for using dangerous and inflammatory language during a speech at one of the UK's largest far-right protests. At the rally, Musk called for the dissolution of Parliament and the removal of Starmer's centre-left Labour government, telling the crowd, "You either fight back or you die." A spokesperson for Starmer said the UK is a fair and tolerant country and warned that such language threatens violence and intimidation on Britain's streets. And on that note, it's time for a very short break. Stay with NewsX World. Much more on the other side.